What's up, everybody? It is Pugway or Connor here, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk. Today I want to be talking about fear. No, not the emotion. No, it doesn't relate to Batman. This is actually going to be talking about fear, or First Encounter Assault Recon, which was a way to justify giving your horror game such a terrible title. More importantly, I wanted to be discussing what fear did correctly that modern-day first-person shooters really could learn from. And it's not so much just fear as it is classic shooters in general. There's been a big shift in the industry, starting all the way back with the release of the original Half-Life, and more noticeably games like Call of Duty 4, that have led from a shift in the first-person shooter genre away from more free-form, almost puzzle-like maze games like the original Doom, into more linear, 6-hour, set-piece-based explosion fest action sequences. And personally, I find myself to be a little bit of a fan of both. But where the 6-hour campaign and overly hand-holdy gameplay has started to become stale, I find myself coming back to a lot more of these classic shooters and wishing that they had just a little bit of modern paint on them, but still that they hold up better than even some of the modern day releases do. So today I want to talk about what is it that fear does right? What is it about classic shooters that makes them so appealing even years after their release? Now, for some of you, certainly, fear is not a classic shooter. If you were to define classic shooter, you may be thinking something more like Doom or Duke Nukem 3D or some of the original Quake games. Fear is an early 2000s title, but it is one of the games that I like to consider as one of the last of the second generation of shooter games. If you look at the first generation of shooter games, and this is an arbitrary system I've made up, we're talking games like Doom, Duke Nukem, Quake. These early kind of games that really were puzzle games that had a bit of a shooting shell on top of it. And while those games are still certainly fun and they're still certainly enjoyable, people that identify as fans of modern first-person shooters often aren't really a fan of those styles of games. The second generation of first-person shooters is what I like to consider fear being. It's very much a combination of the third generation or the current generation of first-person shooters and that first generation, in that it is somewhat linear but not overly hand-holdy. It features a lot of different set pieces, but none that really remove you from the action, and it features a story that is more structured than a game like Doom or Duke Nukem. And one of those earlier points is one of the main things that I think makes Fear and a lot of other classic shooters such great games, is that they're limited, but they're not strictly linear. You notice in this area that I'm fighting in here, and this, by the way, is actually Fear Perseus Mandate, which is one of the expansion packs, which is something I'm going to be talking about much later in the video. But you notice in the area that I'm fighting in here that I'm not strictly limited to a corridor with AI sitting down this way shooting at me, and me down on the other end. I'm given a little bit more freedom to approach this situation in the way that I want to. And the industry certainly hasn't been shying away from player choice. Lots of games like Far Cry and Deus Ex, I'm talking about the newer releases, are really selling themselves on being games that really feature player choice, and you can choose to play objectives the way you want to. Oftentimes, though, this is either a more arbitrary or artificial choice, as you'll find that one play style really has dominance over another, or it isn't really present to the degree that it was advertised. Earlier first-person shooters like Fear offer player choice in a more limited fashion than games like the original Deus Ex or even to a certain extent Human Revolution, but they also don't advertise to be games that offer branching player paths. Instead, the player choice in games like Fear comes from the ability to tackle gunfights in a more dynamic way. Sure, unlike a game like Deus Ex where you can maybe choose to sneak your way through, you're going to be getting into a gunfight. No one's going to be able to play Fear without killing anybody. But while you're in that gunfight, you have a lot more opportunities for flanking routes. You have a lot more opportunities to move around the level in ways that the AI are not going to expect. Likewise, the AI has a lot more opportunities to move around the level in ways that you don't expect, and it creates a lot more dynamic and fun gunfights that allow the game really to stand on its own as a pure gameplay experience, as opposed to needing a story and explosive set piece like the COD games in order to keep it entertaining. For any of you that have played a Call of Duty game since Call of Duty 4, which is almost the entire gaming community, love it or hate it, oftentimes those campaigns tend to be a great wild ride the first time through. You really enjoy them the first time through. And then after that, you kind of start to see through the facade that they've created. You don't really have a lot of player choice. There isn't really a lot that you as the player have a lot of impact on, and therefore subsequent playthroughs really start to lose their luster as you kind of get to see behind the curtain, so to speak. You know what's coming, you know what to expect. And after that 6-hour explosion action fest movie-like experience is over, you really have no desire to go back to it. Games like Fear have a lot less of those explosive set pieces, but what they lack in that regard, they make up for in solid gameplay, which is really what separates the game genre from other such genres like movies, for instance. And so Fear really excels at being a solid first-person shooter above all else, and it's certainly not a fantastic game. It's certainly not one that is groundbreaking. I honestly chose it as the topic for this video because it is slightly average, but it's average for a time period that we don't see anymore. And I don't mean to use average as a negative here. I use average as in it has unique mechanics that aren't overtly unique. Slow motion is not necessarily a groundbreaking new thing, but that's what makes it so special in my mind, is that it doesn't stand as a fun game to play because of anything it does different. It just does something really simple really, really well. And those set pieces that I talked about earlier, a lot of times you'll notice in Call of Duty or the Call of Duty style of game. And it's certainly not just Call of Duty. Battlefield has taken on this approach. The Medal of Honor games have taken on this approach. Indeed, a lot of modern first-person shooters have taken the Call of Duty style approach, that sort of third-generation first-person shooter that I was talking about earlier. Those set pieces tend to remove you from the action. You're watching things fall. You're watching explosions. Fear has a lot of these set-piece style moments, but they never remove you from the action. Half-Life is another great example of a game that really puts you into different set pieces, but doesn't take control away from the player. And while it can be argued, and I think successfully can be argued, that this minimizes the effect of the set piece, it also doesn't break your immersion as the player of the game. More importantly, though, and something that I think the industry has taken a big step back on, is that AI in Fear is capable of handling itself in a fight. You saw earlier that the AI wasn't particularly smart, but it had a good balance between being overtly aggressive while also maintaining a level of fun. And so that's a big thing with Fear, is that you're in gunfights with artificial intelligence that is intelligent enough to the point where you feel like you can't just sit down a corridor and shoot at them without being so intelligent that you're kind of getting this feeling like they're cheating. And it's something that the industry has, for whatever reason, kind of taken a back seat oftentimes to those set-piece moments. A lot of modern shooters, Fear 3 included, that we shall not name, really focused a lot more on having just a lot of bad guys and making them look pretty and ensuring that they could sit behind a box at the other end of the room, as opposed to really coming up with AI that could react to what was going on around it. And I understand why, because it's not an easy thing to do, but it is something that makes the experience all that much better. And of course, you can't have a first-person shooter without satisfying gunplay, and that's something that Fear has in spades. I'm not going to say that it always hits its mark. Some of the guns are a little bit quiet for the situation that's going on. They don't really have a lot of kick, but what it lacks in basic gunplay mechanics, it really makes up for in its slow-motion mechanics and the way that enemies react to your gunfire. Oftentimes, when you're shooting at guys, you get these limbs that go flying off. They react in certain very ragdoll ways. They'll start spraying bullets all over the place. When you go into slow motion, you get these really nice bullet trail effects that look surprisingly good even for today. And overall, it's just an incredibly fun experience. Is it the most solid gunplay that I've ever seen? No. But if those ideas were taken and modernized somewhat, I think you would find that you have a really good foundation here that could use with a little bit more spit and polish just to make it all that more entertaining. Difficulty also factors into this as well. You saw earlier I was in gunfights and I died several times. And that's something that modern games really like to shy away from. They really don't want players to feel super challenged. They want this kind of movie-like experience. And a lot of times when you're playing those Call of Duty Medal of Honor style games, they move along with such a movie pace that you kind of feel like dying is lessening your experience. Whereas really in games, dying is, or a failure state in any rate, is sort of part of the fun. A lot of genres, roguelikes and roguelites, really make dying a big part of the experience, and lots of people love those games for that. And I feel like to discredit this entirely, to discredit failure as a strength of the medium, is really to play against your inherent strengths. Fear moves along its plot at a good pace, but it doesn't ever make you feel that, like, by dying you are ruining its flow. It's able to move along with the knowledge that you're going to be dying and you're going to be dying frequently, and it manages to give you these certain areas where you really do feel challenged, and then you can overcome those and feel triumph, and then throw a nice quick save in there and move on. And it's really something that you don't realize, I certainly didn't realize, that I had missed until I kind of came back into it. And I was like, you know, I don't like to fail, but I also like my successes to be worth something. And that's something that classic shooters had in spades. I mentioned earlier that what I was playing was not actually the base game Fear, but it was actually one of its expansion packs, Perseus Mandate. And this was one of two expansion packs that came out for the original Fear, the second one being Extraction Point. And Fear is one of the last games, I think, to do DLC right, and this was before the nasty, dirty title of DLC had been applied to anything. I'm going to take an unpopular opinion here and say DLC is great. I really like DLC, but I don't like the way that the industry has taken DLC and kind of corrupted it to work to its own ends. I really enjoy DLC because of the promise of more game. When I finished Deus Ex Human Revolution, I really wanted to play more of that game. And when they released the Missing Link DLC, that was fantastic because it was another story set in that universe that gave me that same gameplay with enough fresh and new mechanics and a new setting and a new subplot and new characters to keep me interested, keep me invested, and to give me an excuse to come back to that world that wasn't just a rehash of what I had done before. And for that reason, I love DLC. What I don't love about DLC is the way that it has been cashed in on. If you look at a lot of different games, Call of Duty being a good example, DLCs have turned into trivial skin packs. They've turned into, you can pay $2 here, $5 there, and they market them as DLC when in fact they're microtransactions. On the other hand, you get DLC that is so very reskin-like that it's just, it's uncanny. A game that's getting a lot of praise recently, and one that I really enjoy, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, I think was guilty of this in its most recent DLC release, which was Lord of the Hunt. And is Lord of the Hunt a bad DLC? No, but I was kind of burnt out on the main gameplay loop of Shadow of Mordor. I had bought the season pass. I was hoping to get some DLC that would breathe some new life into it, and instead what I got was a a set of new war chiefs that were set in primarily the same area, with realistically a couple more cutscenes and a couple of interesting new animals, but nothing that really warrants the price I paid for it up front. Fear did DLC right, and indeed a lot of classic shooters did DLC right. We weren't looking at small downloadable content packs, we were looking at full expansion packs, things that were worthy of their own reviews and their own time, things, games that gave you more of what you were looking for with enough new features, new areas, new context, new story, practically new games that were sold at a lesser price. And when DLC first kind of became a thing, and it seemed great because you were getting smaller content than expansion packs, but you were getting them at much lower prices, and obviously of the convenience of downloads as opposed to having to actually physically go to the store. But as time has gone on, DLC prices have gone up, and DLC quality has gone down considerably. And it is with that in mind that I really would like a callback to fear-sized DLC or actual expansion packs, where I'm actually getting new missions, new characters, new stories, and I'm getting to jump back into that world and experience it again. And certainly the industry itself hasn't shied away from this, but first-person shooters, which is primarily what this video is about, certainly have. It's something that I would really like to see make a comeback. The final thing that I think Fear really does well, two things really, is on its level design and the way that the world reacts to your involvement. Fear's level design plays into a lot what I was talking about earlier when we were discussing non-linear gameplay. You were able to move around the environment, you were able to flank enemies, there was opportunities to do what I've just been doing here for a while, which is hide in these boxcars, pick up different supplies. I'm having to manage my health, I'm having to manage my armor and my ammo, and more importantly, I'm given these firefights where it's not just boom boom constant action, look forward, pull the trigger. I'm having to assess the battlefield, assess my current situation, and adapt accordingly. And that is something that the modern first-person shooter has gotten rid of, but that the level design in Fear really facilitates. You're working in big open sandboxes, and that's the thing. A lot of game designers talk today about player choice, and while a lot of games like Far Cry, like Deus Ex, do offer player choice, I'm not trying to say that they don't, it seems like nowadays, if you can't give it enough player choice to make it a box quote, it's not worth having at all. And I just don't think that's the right direction that we want to be moving in. What I think we should do is every game should have a certain amount of player choice. Is the story going to react to what I'm doing in Fear? No, it's not. The story's moving in the same direction. But these individual gunfights and the way that I'm approaching them and the way that I'm getting through them, that's all mine. And we're seeing an increasing lack of that in modern gaming and modern shooters. More and more, the battles, the confrontations that you get into as a gamer are more or less pre-scripted. You are given so very little freedom in where to move, you're given so very little freedom in the level designs and the environments, that everyone's fight plays out more or less the same. And that environment is important not just in the way that it facilitates the way that you play the game, but also in the way that it reacts to you playing the game. And this is particularly something that I've noticed in Fear as I've been playing recently. And it's such a minor feature, but it's something that I think this game does so well that doesn't necessarily apply to all classic shooters, but really does apply to this game. And that's the way that the environment reacts to the way that you're shooting, particularly all of the dust and debris that you see kicking up from when I shoot. And what's interesting about this is it really forces you to change up your strategies. You'll notice that through no part in this video have I actually stayed still for very long. I've been constantly moving around. I have been constantly looking for new supplies, looking for new areas. Partly that's because of the AI being aggressive, and that's because the environment facilitates that. But a large part of that has to do with I simply cannot afford to stay in one place for very long because I can't see well enough to stick around. And on paper, that sounds kind of annoying, but in practice, what it really forces me to do is to stay constantly engaged in the experience. It's not a Call of Duty type thing where I can kind of haphazardly, zone out and sit back and kind of shoot, and just kind of follow the glowing yellow circle on my minimap until, the next guy starts telling me what to do. I have to really think for myself, and I have to adapt to these situations. I can't stay behind the same box. I can't stay in the same area. Also, that right there, that's a great thing. We need to keep that in games. But realistically, I can't stay in the same area. I can't stay in the same spots. I have to, as a player, actually have some skill and adapt to the situations that I'm given. There's a lot of other things that classic shooters have done right, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the Michael Bay 6-hour gameplay experience, but I just don't think that it facilitates the strengths of the mediums. It's more like a popcorn shooter, popcorn movie to me than it is a true manifestation of what this industry and what this medium can really become. So those are my thoughts on Fear. Those are my thoughts on classic shooters in general. Why I think they're just a better option, and why I think they really hold up in the same way that once the luster and the prettiness of new Call of Duty games wears off, those games just don't. So I'd like to know your thoughts. I'd love to hear those down in the comments section. What do you think about modern games? Do you think I hit the nail on the head? Do you think that modern games are better? I'd really love to know. I like to encourage some active discussion down in those comments. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you like this kind of video, if you like my analytical style, I'd certainly love it if you left a like, if you left some comments letting me know what I could do to improve. I tried to take a more scripted approach to this episode. I think I ran a little bit long, but I had a lot to say. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.